Hello, everybody. Beth and I are chatting about what we're going to be talking about today in the CPTSD podcast. And we are boiling down codependency, codependent relationships, what that looks like in your life, what you might want to be aware of. And I think maybe some hidden tricks on how to begin the process because it's not always easy. So with that, we welcome you to the CPTSD podcast. See you inside.
Welcome back, everyone, to the CPTSD podcast. We are on season 2, episode 5, and we're talking about codependent relationships today. I am Elizabeth Pace, licensed professional counselor supervisor in Louisiana, joined as ever by my counterpart, colleague, and friend, Tabatha Bird Weaver from the great state of Oregon, licensed marriage and family therapist, licensed professional counselor. So we're going to talk today about a topic that I feel like we'd be hard pressed to find someone who's like, I've never heard of that in the West. Like, it seems like everybody to a certain degree knows a little bit about it. And if you've ever had the experience of someone unskillfully psychoanalyzing you, a little bit of information is not always a gift. So what we're here to try and do is talk about from that compassionate lens that we always want to take from what are your symptoms and how do you show up? How does this make sense in present day based on past experiences? But first, we're going to start like we usually do by defining it. So Tab, if you were talking to someone who was brand new in your office and you were trying to gently float by the possibility that codependency might be an issue for them, where would you start?
I think that's a great question, Beth. First of all, probably not with codependency. But if it came up, what I would be wanting to say is, first of all, codependency in and of itself is not a diagnosis. It's a descriptor. And I would like for us to be careful when we use that word in here, because while it's accurate and real and true, it's also been weaponized by our culture, as we've talked about, meaning somehow codependency is your fault. And that is not true. And so that's where I would start, Beth, is let's talk about what's not your fault and what you are responsible for. And that is usually a hard conversation, regardless of topic. What would your words be?
I describe to people, depending on how ready they are to hear it, what it feels like to be like lit up and in this sensation of like the love roller coaster or the emotional roller coaster with a person. And I treat a lot of folks with attachment trauma in my private practice. So by the time we're talking about present day relationships, the hope for me is that I've also gotten a history from them about where they learned about relationships. But if we were going to do like a Google search definition of what a codependent relationship looks like, how would you define that?
Great. So literally a Google search, I'm going to read it to you. Codependency is a dysfunctional relationship dynamic where one person assumes the role of the, and I'm air quoting for those listening only, the giver, and the other, the taker. And the giver ends up sacrificing their own needs, desires, reality, sometimes if there's gaslighting going along with this codependency, and those two do go together, for the other person. That's what it feels like. But I think I would add on there, Beth, that it's not always for the other person. That's not the motivation. It's for your survival. And so that's what I was talking about earlier when I'm saying it's been weaponized, is that this is not something that you're doing because it's fun. It hurts horrifically. And I think the other thing I would add to this Google definition is that codependency is rooted in shame. And that brings us right back to that attachment rupture. Most of us with CPTSD who have ever had a codependent relationship, and I'm pretty sure if you've had CPTSD diagnosis, you have had codependent relationships, at least starting with your parents, right? Anyway, my point in all of that is it's not necessarily something that's your fault, but you're the only one who can fix it.
That's such a good way to put
And
it.
that shame response will stop you from fixing it. And that's, I think, really where the heart of what I'd like to talk about in our conversation today is.
Yeah.
How about you?
As you were talking, it brought up, kind of got my brain juices flowing. I think about where your sense of like worth or identity comes from. So when I think about a codependent relationship, I think about like, am I okay all by myself inside myself? This is not the same thing as being like relationship anorexic and avoiding intimacy because it doesn't feel safe. What I'm talking about is if the other person feels good, then I get to feel good. If the other person doesn't feel good, then I don't get to feel good. And so we're talking about this idea of like an external locus of control. And we're not even hinting at it anymore. When did you have an external locus of control? Sub, 6, 7, 8 years old. So when it was someone else's job to take care of you, if they didn't show you that people are safe, the world is safe, and that you're actually just okay the way that you are without having to do anything, then you unconsciously are attracted to people who make you feel familiar in present day. So if it's like, if I can just get this person to act the way I want them to act, because I'm hearing you, like the Google definition, I think, yeah, like we're both, let's say, skilled enough in what we do for a living to say like there are some blind spots there. Again, not from like a place of judgment or harshness, but struggling with codependency also includes trying to control external circumstances that are not in your control in order to try and get some of your own safety and nurturance needs met. So if I could just get my partner to stop drinking, then our relationship would be fine. And then, the partner is saying, well, I drink because you nag me. And the person's like, I nag you because you drink. It's this really painful, like chasing, running away. So I also think about codependency because you're saying shame and I'm saying like where worth comes from. So if my sense of worth comes from other people's approval, other people being filled up. And when one of our first episodes, I said something like, you learned that the only way to get your needs met would be warming your hands on the afterglow of filling somebody else up. One of my friends listened to that and was like, I want to crochet that on a pillow and scream into that pillow every time I feel that way. And I was like, oh, word, we'll do it. That you get habituated to meeting someone else's needs, like what you're talking about, the giver, because how they feel and how they're doing is the indicator of whether or not you're safe or you're okay.
Absolutely. And it is really hard. I'm kind of stumbling around because I wanted to figure out where to go, but here's where it is. Codependency, that idea, this term, it originally started out of AA. And so when we use examples like, covering up for the way somebody's substance abuse harms your life or your livelihood or you, there is definitely that component. But I want to open it up just a little bigger, if that's all right with you, Beth. And that is, these relationships do not have to be romantic. You can be codependent with friends. You can be codependent with your external family. I was until we broke up. Totally the person that took on the responsibility for the other's problems, fixed the problem, and then somehow it became my fault. Feel familiar? Right? But I really want to make it large to say societally, we are codependent. So this could be your job. This could be an institution that you're a part of, government, school, whatever it is. If there is some form of the other taking and you over-giving to qualify, to be okay, to have worth and value, then there is something toxic to look at in that relationship.
Well, and these are, we've talked a lot about systems and how they are, like, it's really just this, it's concentric circles of the same thing, meaning like in a family unit or in a romantic relationship, you can watch this generalize out into a lot of other places. Yeah, like, so but you also may be getting rewarded if you're doing this well by getting a lot of accolades at work, or
That's right.
being the quote unquote glue that holds your family together, or you're the coworker that does everybody else's work because I keep saying quote unquote, like I gotta cut that out, because they can't do it themselves. And then your boss is like, can't you help so and so do their work? And what, some part of you that's like banging to get out of the sub basement of your psyche is like, no. But the part of you that knows how to perform to get your needs met is like, I roll, yes. And then I'm just going to slide this in here. It would be too tangential. And then in order to maybe off gas how exhausted you are, maybe you drink, or maybe you gossip about these people to other people, to like, so it also comes with it a lot of, ultimately, maybe like resentment, exhaustion, because it'll kill you, because it's never enough.
Oh my gosh. So true. Did you have more you wanted to say about that?
I got really
Go for
excited.
it.
The thing I wanted to add was, so if you think about capitalism as a codependent system, and how the whole idea is like work, 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 get your needs met. And then if you're exhausted, or you don't even understand like what's the point anymore, go buy something. Go be a good consumer in order to deal with that exhaustion. So what we're also doing is like closing that loop by getting really exhausted and then coping in a way that makes other people money, so that we can go right back to work and do it all over again. And if you've ever been in a workplace where somebody says something like, we're a family.
Run.
Ah! It's a job. It's a job.
Yep. I love how you're talking about closing the loop on systems, because now I'm going to use a different word, but it's still applicable here, because that's what abusers do. They close the loop and make sure that the system is contained, right? And that's what capitalism has done. And our needs aren't even being met anymore. I mean, if you read anything, most people can't even buy a house at this point. That's not your needs being met, folks. The bottom line here is, though, and this is where I think for me, I want to be tender, is that if you're doing this in your life, if you recognize this in your life, you're the only person who can stop it. And you are highly conditioned to not stop it. And that doesn't mean you don't have mind power or control or determination in your life. But when we go back to those core beliefs that we've talked about so many times in this series, there are deep underlying core beliefs that will keep you stuck. And one of the tools that is used when that's being installed in us is a lack or confusion around boundaries. Right? And so we can talk a lot about how other people will violate your boundaries, Beth. I know we could talk a lot about that, but I want to talk about a little bit how we violate our own boundaries. Okay? And we do. If codependency is going on, we are definitely violating our own boundaries. Here is a great example of how I learned, oh my gosh, I'm creating my own misery by not holding on to some boundaries. All right. So this is about a decade ago, and I'm just going to be silly for a minute. So ring-a-ding-a-dingy. Hello. Yes, this is Tabatha. I definitely can make something for the potluck on Sunday. Yeah, I'll do that. Well, what do you want? I'm happy to make anything. Okay. All right. Yeah, I can do 3 desserts and 1 main course. Yeah, see you then. No problem. Oh, I'll also use reusable containers so that you can accidentally keep them and put them in the church's storehouse of containers. Yeah, I got that. Okay, bye. I freaking do not want to make that. Why did I do that? Why are they always wanting potluck foods? Anger that I just committed to something I didn't want to do. And so that's not fair. That's not fair to me. Thanks for your reaction. I see that. That's not fair to the kind woman who's just trying to get some food for Sunday, where we've all agreed to meet and eat, right? And I realized, even kind of, I don't know if it's level up, down, out, or what, but when I do that and offer to bring food for a potluck and I don't want to, and I'm stirring my rage into my no-bake cookies instead of my love into my no-bake cookies, I'm not helping anybody, including me.
And then everybody's eating rage cookies.
And rage cookies are not delicious, folks.
Or somebody's like, great cookies, and you're like, thanks a lot. Yeah, you make such a great point, where maybe you don't necessarily identify with the word codependent, but you do identify with us describing feeling enraged and resentful at the way that people take advantage of you. So to Tabatha's like perfect disclosure of what can I do instead of what do you want me to do? And then can I do it? Or like, how much do you want? Out anything you want. Like, we say those words. And if you've ever lied and then were like really surprised about what came out of your mouth, you know what it feels like to have like to surprise yourself. One time I got pulled over and the police officer was like, is the address right on this driver's license? And I was like, no, officer, but I'm a student. Lie. I didn't even expect to lie about that, but I was like, sometimes when we talk about like this awareness and this waking up, sometimes our behavior is inscrutable to us, this huge surprise. So maybe when we say codependent, and if codependent has become this like sharp tool that we cut each other to ribbons with, and you're like, well, I don't identify with being codependent. I am tough as nails. I don't need anybody because I'm doing everything myself. Okay. That's where my little fox ears prick up, because then it's like, and who is the little tortoise upon which the whole planet is balancing? And my clients would go, me, and that sucks. When's it my turn? Right? This idea, like, if I did not work, these worlds would perish. And so maybe not codependency, but if you can relate to that sensation of resentment, because everybody's always taking from you, but you get really grossed out when someone describes you as like the giver, or the one who's like cutting your own guts open and like giving anybody what they want. In the state of Louisiana, Tab, the pelican is on our state flag, and she's got a little red spot on her bod. She's in a nest with her babies, because pelicans are known to rip pieces of their own flesh off of themselves to feed their newborns if there isn't enough food. Come to Louisiana. And maybe we don't want to talk about sexism yet today, but if you have been conditioned in some way by this patriarchal white supremacist culture that giving is, or overdoing is how one day you are going to get your turn. Do you want to finish that statement for me, Tab? When's my turn coming, Tab?
Sis, your turn is now. Take it.
Oh!
Your turn is now. You just got to take it.
Yes. Okay. So no one is going to give you the break you want, because you may have trained everyone to expect. Listen, and here's what's really unpleasant. You may have trained people to expect that you're going to do it, and expect that they have to pay the consequences of your rage, of your overwhelm, of your exhaustion, and of your frustration. So we've talked a little bit about what it looks like related to resentment and anger. What are some of the other like ways you think codependency shows up, either in like dyadic relationship partnerships, like romantic partnerships, or in other ways? Like, what have we not covered yet?
Well, one of, I think, the concepts that you will find if you Google search codependency is that it's recently been called an addiction to emotion or relationships. And I can get behind understanding why that is there. I'm not 100% sure I agree with the terminology. And so we can hash that out a little bit. Because I think that terminology doesn't always take account of why people behave in codependent ways, and that it actually is a very, very deep wound. Same reason people depend in narcissistic ways. It's a very, very deep wound, right? So I just think that there's a component of always choosing somebody or someplace or a group where you don't eventually fit in because you are used up and used dry. Or you feel like you can express yourself safely without being shut down. Those are some things to pay attention to. And if you're somebody who's always dating or connecting with the wrong type of person, the same person as before, please remember, we've talked about this a lot, Beth, and you just did. This is because humans like to have something called homeostasis. That means it's the same and we know it, right? Because we understand what to do and what to function, how functioning works. Codependency is a homeostatic thing. We want to keep it there because it's how we understand relationship dynamics.
We know how to succeed there. We know how to be
correct.
Succeed. Right.
Yes.
So there's mastery. I'm sorry, go ahead.
You go ahead. I missed what you just said.
Well, so like we know how to be successful there. We have a sensation of mastery, to be able to sit with a neutral circumstance that isn't thrilling or that isn't crushing or exhausting is something that makes clients, certainly me in some circumstances, feel really off balance. So it's actually that just like getting to know someone slowly without them being like, do you want to do a bunch of shots of Fireball and then like, I don't know, find a hotel? That if they're like, I'd just like to get to know you over the course of 6 months and then like maybe see about getting physical. And you're looking at them like, you haven't flipped a table and you haven't yelled at anybody. How do I even know you like me?
How do I know that there's engagement without conflict? Yeah. That hurts too, by the way, over and over and over, because you think you find a connection and then the disappointment sets in and then we start to scramble to try and make that not true. I mean, codependence, myself, I am so good at denial, right? I'm not in a codependent relationship with my partner right now, but I have some other ones where I feel it, I see it. They are ones where I have less control, like capitalism, right? I can't turn the tide for the United States. But I wanted to give a place to start for people. One of the, I think, foremost books on this topic is called Codependent No More. And it was written by Melody Beatty a long time ago, I think like early to mid 80s. And she's the one that made that term codependent popular.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a workbook that goes with that book. If you think this is you, go for it. It's an old book. Some of the languaging may require updating, but it's still true. I've used it with clients just within the last year. And the one thing they'll all say is, this stings. This stings to look at it. And I have to, because it's making so much more sense to me now.
Right.
Do you think that there's a good place for people to start, Beth, or where would you recommend?
So I want to tag on one more thing, because we've talked about this kind of in a lighthearted way in other podcast episodes. This idea, and you've heard me use the phrase before, addiction to chaos. That chaotic does not always mean violent. It does not always mean abusive. But if you go into a job interview and you're like, what are my job duties? And they're like, well, we're kind of in the state of transition right now, and everybody's going to have to wear a lot of different hats. And so we're probably going to need someone who's like a maverick and can do like 17 different things. And like, how are you for working evenings? And instead of you going, get me out of here, you go, ooh, like I know how I thrive here. And so, I've had clients say to me before things like, well, I can do like 17 things at the same time. So that's a superpower of mine. And maybe, and then if I start to ask like deeper questions about, when are you expecting to, get your turn, or like, what do you think you're going to earn by this? But to your question, something that I realized, back to your like potluck example, the questions that if you have CPTSD or if you have had trauma in your childhood, that you ask out of order, because you're saying like, what are my boundaries? I violate my own boundaries. If you're used to centering someone else's satisfaction over your own needs, you start by going, can I do it? Yes. Instead of the order, which I ask my clients to consider. So if you are driving, just listen. But if you're somewhere where you can write it down, the questions are in order, 3 of them. What are my boundaries? First question, you have to know that for yourself. Second question, where can I compromise? Third question, is that emotional labor that I am willing to do? Willing instead of can. Because can we completely neglect our own needs in order to be able to make someone else feel good? Yes. You have a lifetime of experience. But if you start with, can I do it? You don't know whether or not you're even compromising, because you do not know where your boundaries are in all of that. So I would, so those are the 3 questions. What are my boundaries? Where can I compromise? Is it work that I'm willing to do? And if you don't ask the questions in that order, you may be essentially writing yourself that recipe for resentment that may come as a huge surprise to you, because Tabatha was already talking about how do we deny that something is not working for us? Easy. Listen to the episode on dissociation. Easy. Another thing that I'll reflect that I think is a part of this is that if you are familiar with codependent relationships in your own life, you may also be familiar with the sensation of idealizing someone, putting them up on a pedestal, and then being devastated, crushed, let down, disappointed when the inevitable crash happens and this person is just human. They just got regular old messy stuff that they've got to work through. So what also happens when we idealize someone is if I meet someone and go, oh my gosh, this is it. This person is the answer. I'm building this fantasy world of what they're going to do for me when they finally give me whatever it is that I think they have. And then when they can't show up that way, the fear of that disintegration of the fantasy can keep people in hot, burning, really painful places for a lot longer than is healthy for them.
For a lifetime, Beth. For a lifetime. I love all the things you're saying, and I absolutely am going to use those 3 questions in order, because that is a really great way to kind of get an overview of what's going on. So I want to back up for just a minute and talk about a couple things you said. One is, I really love how you're talking about if you can resonate with the idea of resentment, then this might be for you. Yeah. Yes. And let's step back one step before that. If you can resonate with the idea of disappointment, that's the precursor to resentment. Yeah. And where boundaries come into this is, well, first of all, if you don't know what they are, they're not really existent, right? And so you may have to start with very simple things. But your boundaries, as you were saying earlier, Beth, is what sets people's expectations of how they can treat you. And so if your boundaries and how you will accept being treated, let's put some personal responsibility in there, right? That's always going to come back to that. So eventually my boundary got to be, I don't do potlucks. I will show up and eat, and I'll carry stuff to the kitchen for someone else to clean, but I'm not doing that anymore. I got so much happier, and I didn't have to be pissed off at a whole church. Because I said yes.
And then bringing joy to the potluck instead of those anger cookies. Oh, I love that. Right. You can just show up and be like, I'm happy to be here because I brought what I can, which is me. Good for you.
Right.
I love that.
So when you're starting to think about boundaries, Beth, this is what I would tell people. First, It's going to be easiest for you, in my personal experience and experience with clients, it is going to be easiest for you to identify things you do not like instead of things that might be good for you. So saying yes more to things that are good for you, it's a good boundary and it's a good goal. And if you're in the middle of this process and you're just now kind of like, ooh, that might be me, start with things you don't like because they're going to hit you the fastest and the hardest. So here are some boundaries I set with my dad when I was 12. They have never been honored, but I just want to give you some simple ideas. Don't talk to me like that. Mm-hmm. Don't take my stuff without asking, right? Very simple things. And it's to bring your awareness. I'm not saying it's simple to execute that. That's going to be complicated and require mastery, but your awareness of where your boundaries need shifting, start with things you don't like, you don't enjoy, that make you feel bad, that hit that shame gong of, unless you do this, you're not worth that.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I appreciate that. A thing that did I lose my train of thought? You may not be in a position to say it yet because it doesn't come out of your throat. Like Tabatha, I imagine that you must have been an extremely fierce 12-year-old to try to stand up to your dad, right? Even though he wasn't respecting the boundaries, it doesn't mean that you weren't like trying to set them.
Yep.
If you're in a place right now where you don't feel like it can come out of your throat, it's okay to note internally, this is not okay with me. And the other thing that, I name drop her all the time. She's so ancient. Pema Chodron, the Buddhist nun, she also talks about how what we need to do on this opposite is marking what we do like. So then I am looking for the evidence that I do know how to do what I do like. So that could just be, I'm eating the eggs that I made this morning and I go, oh, this tastes good. Or I say no to plans and spend the evening at home and notice that it's nourishing. And I go, oh, I did something good for myself. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that you're right. Like if you're just getting started in all of this, it really is like, and what's really, it wouldn't surprise me. And I don't think it'll surprise you either that sometimes our clients will say things like, I don't know what I don't like. I don't know what I don't actually know. And this is where you can get into your body, as we often talk about, like, get into your body. So I'm like segueing the opening into like talking about energy centers, root issues. And before we do that, because I'm opening the door for that, the thing I'll also say to you is that you're not loving people by saying yes all the time. So to Tabitha's point, if it's like resentful 3 desserts and an entree, or if I say yes and I'm like heavily sighing while I'm doing you this favor, and then I'm gossiping about you to other people, or I'm like spinning a story about how you're a villain in my head as I'm doing you this favor so you can tell me what a good person I am. Gross.
Right.
No is the gift you give to the people that you love, because what it means then, if you can start saying no to them, is that your yes is authentic. So they know that when you say no, it's because you can't or you won't do it. And they know that when you say yes, it's because you can and you will do it, instead of, I guess I will. No is clarifying, and it sets that relationship free. I did not say, because Tab already said, doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. Simple, yes. Easy, oh no.
Right.
So I said, get into our bodies related to knowing what I do like and what I don't like. What do you want to talk about related to that kind of somatic or like energy center aspect of codependency or getting to know yourself in this way?
I love that you're directing us into this conversation. And I would say there are different levels to getting into your body, especially when you've had the history that most of us with CPTSD have had. And so if you are just now starting to recognize any of the patterns we've ever talked about on this podcast in you, one of the best things that you can do is to watch your breath, Just notice what happens. Does it get tight? Does it get bigger? Where does it go? And while that's happening, watch where your body is lighting up. So for example, in my household, when I get triggered, my stuff's all in my lower 3 chakras. That's not true for my partner. It tends to come up here, right? And so it doesn't matter where, as long as you're noticing that it's occurring. So level 1 is pay attention. Notice, I never realized I got a twist in my stomach every time this person says that to me, or every time I say yes and I don't want to. If you're a little bit more advanced than that, you've been practicing awareness and breathing, I would really encourage you to find a practice where you are intentionally grounding yourself. And there are a couple of different ways to do this. One is just notice where you're at and be in the present moment. And so a great tool that lots of us therapists have used over the years is called 5-4-3-2-1. And there's many adaptations to this. And it is, if you're feeling ungrounded, triggered, flighty, tight, whatever your sensation is, look around you, notice 5 things you can see. And I'm going to go through this fast because this isn't easy to do either if you're triggered or haven't practiced it. So be kind. 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, right? 3 things you can sense, meaning my butt on the seat. Okay, not an emotion. 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. We've just started at the top and gone down except for the whole body feeling part. That usually will get you back here. You might have to do it several times. You might have to do it first, do whatever you're doing, and then redo it. Try that. If you want a deeper grounding, there are a lot of visualizations that start with grounding the lower half of our bodies to the Mother Earth. And so if you're thinking about that from a chakra perspective, near the root of your tailbone, just envision there that there's a beautiful light. And notice that that light goes all the way into the core of the earth. And your mind might do things like, it can't, that's rock. That's okay. Just notice that thought and keep noticing that it's okay for it to go through. You might also notice that your feet feel connected to the planet. Sometimes visual people will envision roots coming out of their feet. Sometimes people who are somatically sensitive might notice that there's a tingle or a hum to their bottom of their feet. This is a literal magnetic connection, like it's measurable. Okay, tune into those things and see if you can be even more present, because when you are more present, you're going to know more about yourself. You're going to understand where your boundaries are, where you are. You're going to understand what some of the core beliefs might be, even if you don't come out of, this huge enlightenment session with a full list of all of your core beliefs. You might come out of a grounding session like that, feeling more present and thinking, hey, I really need us to shift the tone of our discussions when we have an argument. Or, hey, I need to quit my job because it is making me insane. It's going to be up to you what you experience. But my point is, groundedness and presence is how you're going to know what the heck to do next. Because if you're not here, you don't know. And you really don't have any power if you're not present. In the moment. I'm not saying you're powerless completely, right? What do you think about those ideas, Beth?
I'm grateful. I appreciate everything that you shared. And as someone who historically had and sometimes am still like a slave to my own intellect, the part of me that I let do all the work, such that I know I've mentioned this in a podcast. I did EMDR doggedly for 6 months, and my therapist would be like, what's the sensation in your body? And I'm like, nothing. And we kept going until one day it was like this blossom and sensation of heartache in my right heart. All that to say, if there's a piece of you that's tenacious, you can tag that in. So if you hear Tabatha talking about this and you can picture that, awesome. I celebrate that. Getting into your body, however you're doing it, because then what you can actually do is notice the fact that in this exact moment in time, there's no imminent threat. We're usually, so to circle it back around to the beginning conversation, we're usually people pleasing because we are afraid of what will happen if we don't. We are usually giving to someone else all of our unpaid emotional labor because we don't know how to ask for our needs to be met. And if we ask this person and they go, that's not the agreement we made. What if that relationship ends and then I'll be alone? As if there was any other place to feel more alone than in a relationship where you're not getting your needs met and you're just like siphoning off all of your energy into someone else. Oh, I might have lost the thread. So let me circle it back around.
Well, that was a really good point. I mean, that one, there's probably nothing more lonely than what you're already doing.
Yeah, no doubt. The fear is of the unknown. But if the present day, this is why we say, please dissociate less. Please work on dissociating less. But the reason we ask you to do that is so you can feel the pain of your circumstances, which is what is going to actually get you to work on changing them. They have to feel bad before you're willing to change them. I am fond of saying that I'm the type of person, I have to hit my head on the wall 13, 14 times before I would ever be willing to take one step back, look at Tab and be like, is there another way out of here? Is there another way out of this room? And the door's just right over there. But as long as I'm like, I will do it, I have to do that as many times as I need to until it hurts enough for me to go, maybe I'll try something else. Mm-hmm. So if you're not someone who like can wrap your mind around energy centers and chakras yet, it's cool. It's no big deal. I want you to think about it this way. The base of your tailbone, where there are a lot of nerve endings, endocrine, like your Tab would have to talk about the endocrine system, like she can do it better than me. But what I'll get at is if it's the most associated with protection, connection, safety, and grounding, it's a good place for you to sense into, breathing into like your tailbone, into your pelvis, and saying to yourself something like, in this reality, I am already connected. In this reality, I am already protected. And by doing that, you're also breaking the loop of the fantasy that if you do just enough, or you can get this person to do just enough, they are going to make you feel protected, connected, grounded, and safe. It's not out there. So earlier when I was saying like, Tab, when's it going to be my turn? And she's like, it's right now. I love that. Cause like the people that you're chasing do not have what you are projecting onto them. They just don't have it. So letting them be human and like wading through their own swamp is a gift you give to them. But first and foremost, it's the one that you give to yourself.
I want to make sure I understand what you just said about they don't have it, because I think I agree fully. I think what you're saying is that a lot of us do what's called a positive projection, meaning that the goodness that's inside of me, the nurturing that's inside of me, I put on other people and have expectations of it. Did I get that?
And also when I say close the loop, I mean, I'm codependency from an attachment framework is like, I'm going to go recreate the circumstances of my early attachment wounding with the hope and the fantasy that I'm going to rewrite the ending where I'll finally get the needs met. And so the reason I have to like, I'm seeking it from quote unquote, them that ain't got it. If he's not my dad, then he can't do for me what my dad didn't do for me. But we
nailed it. Yes.
Yeah. We unconsciously go into relationships and we don't even know we're doing that. And then we go, why am I here? Why did I pick another dumpster fire? Why am I in this dumpster fire? Why? Ask your inner child. They'll tell you.
And climb out of the dumpster.
It's hot. Get out of there.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, I want to throw one more thing in about the root chakra in particular and what we're talking about, because when we think about the chakra system, we're talking about vibes that you pick up. You already know these vibes. Even if you don't understand the language and the system I'm talking about, you know the vibes. So you know if somebody's safe or not safe, unless you're codependent and that's confusing to you. Right? But you can feel it. And so what we're trying to talk about here is how to identify those feelings accurately. Right? And so you know if it is safe or not. The root chakra is all about your right to be here and take up space.
Just the way you are.
Guess what doesn't happen? Say that again.
Just the way you are.
Just the way you are. Because you are. You have the right to be here and take up space. And that is something that is deeply lost for those of us who lean towards codependency.
Yeah.
And we find our right to be here and take up space through other people. And it's that hands on the warm afterglow that you're talking about. And I guess I want to say lovingly to you that you deserve more right now. What should we talk about next, Beth? What's on your mind?
I think that like healing from codependency, I also really want to make space to talk about like the Imago framework of like relationships and communication. So there's a couple of things. So I'm making notes that like, so quote unquote, how do you start healing from this? Especially if like sometimes you wake up and you might realize that and you still love the person that you're with. You don't have to leave a relationship in order for that relationship to shift. One of the things they talk about in family systems is that if one person in that family starts changing, everyone else in the family is going to shift to accommodate the change. But this is not the same thing as controlling them into loving you, making them go to therapy. So if like thematically over the next 10 minutes, we can talk about how you start healing. When Tab was talking about, do you know someone is safe? I believe that Tabatha and I can agree that we both believe that you have everything inside of you already to know how to be discerning, but you covered it up because you had to, because that's what, like, you have to eat the food of your parents who are making the food for you. And if they're dangerous and you need to convince yourself that they are safe, then you're actually looking, kind of what Tabatha was saying, you're looking for that positive projection. When Dad pretends that he didn't scream at everybody last night and like spank my sibling and me have to listen to those screams in the other room, and it's in the morning and he's making pancakes and they got bananas in them and he's like, hey everybody, morning. That's his way of saying sorry, but he has not done anything about what happened the night before. I need, right? If I'm a little girl, if I'm a little kid, I need to look at this circumstance and go, I need this to be the truth, not what happened last night. And so a basic question that you can ask yourself if you're starting this like discernment process, how do I know someone is safe? As a basic question you can ask yourself is, do their words and their actions match? If they tell you that they're sorry, is sorry like, I want you to not be mad at me anymore? Or is sorry, I'm going to work on the behavior? When they say they love you, are they like doing it in that way? It's like, well, I love you. Like, I love you. You're the one who's like, you will begin to, so you can sense in your body, is what you're saying and how you're acting matching up? And if it isn't, actually sometimes just as basic as that, how do I know you're safe? Do your words and your actions.
But that's certainly one way to know if you can trust.
Right.
And that's a foundation of safety for sure. Yeah. Right? If you are repeatedly connecting with people or systems that don't keep their word to you and then minimize that, wake up a little bit more and just look around. Yeah. Right? I think where I would say if you're going to start healing from codependency, one of the first things that is painful and required is an inventory. And you may not know what that inventory looks like, and it may take you a while to do it. So this isn't where you're going to sit down and write a list of 50 things right now that you have to change, think about, or do. This is more like in situations where you feel exhausted, put upon, maybe like you are martyring yourself. And I'm not trying to be mean with that word, literally dying to help somebody else. If you're in those situations, start taking account of that. Like, I'm really exhausted and I'm still saying yes. What does that mean?
Yeah.
He lied again and I'm still saying yes. What does that mean? She
Yeah.
took my stuff again and I'm still saying yes. What does that mean? Just what does that mean questions about you, not about them, because that won't help. That's more of the same, right? If you're looking about what does it mean about your other or the system, then you are still approaching that from a codependent relationship standpoint versus what do I need?
Yeah.
What's appropriate for me?
When I hear you say, like, what does that mean? I've heard that question asked. This guy has a podcast. It's called A Quiet Mind, and it's about meditation. And one of the questions that he has he will encourage you to ask is, how am I with that? And then whatever it brings up, you can go, well, how am I with that? And if the answer eventually comes, I'm not okay with that. That is not okay with me. That's also like when Tab is saying, take an inventory. What works for you? What doesn't work for you? And if you don't know that, then how are you going to set boundaries with somebody? Another thing I'll say related to where to start, expect that this is not going to go well in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
We are usually, if you have perfectionism, CPTSD, people pleasing, saying no in the beginning is going to be unskillful, because it might have to sound like no, and it is inappropriate for you to ask me for that. Yo, you don't have to tell somebody that. All you got to do is say no. Or I can't do that because I have a boil on my left butt cheek. And so I'm going to have to stay home. And like, yo, just say no. Like, so in the beginning, you may find yourself saying like, no, justifying it, or no, because someone else is villainous. Like, that feels really familiar for me, even though it's something I'm like working out of. It's like I would have to spin myself up into anger and resentment and villainize someone before I could finally be like, no. But the reason was because I needed that energy to feel justified in having my boundaries. Tabatha and I are talking about the one day where you can look at somebody and be like, I love you. I'm not going to help you find a therapist. Love you. No.
And you really need one. Sorry. You don't have to do that either.
So, yeah, you make a really good point. As you say that, I don't know if it was the point you were trying to make, but it reminds me that, like, you're not going to stop being petty or judgmental. Okay. We all have a mind. All right. So you may still be like, that person needs to da 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 blah, blah, blah. And then you can go up. So that's also what I think about when you say take an inventory. This with tenderness, with gentleness, because we've talked about who are the safe people who can show you yourself. What's the difference between saying, I'm so mean, I've got, I'm an ugly, and going, ooh, judgmentalness is a trait that I picked up from my childhood. This one is telling the whole story. So then the behavior makes perfect sense, but it isn't having to beat yourself up. And it isn't like turning around and being like, and these are the people who are to blame. They will always be to blame. When Tab says you are the only person who can change this, we mean that the gift is that you get to be responsible for yourself and your present.
Yes. And that can be a challenge. But in the long run, I really believe it's where contentment lies.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
And soothing the nervous system such that you'll sometimes hear people talk about this idea of raising the bottom. Like in adult children of alcoholics, family dysfunction, they'll say you might have hit an ACA bottom, meaning that like your fibromyalgia is acting up and you haven't stopped doing a bunch of things for like other people's kids in your extended family, or that you you're in an open relationship, even though like you don't want to be in it, and you're like having a bunch of sex with people that you don't really want to be having sex with, and you're like, all of a sudden it dawns on you that like you are not happy, like whatever your bottom is. I'm not saying, I don't have any judgments about open relationships or monogamy or anything like that. What I'm getting at is like that kind of waking up moment where it finally hurts enough that you're like, I got to do something different. So then the more you can tolerate being in a neutral setting, the more you can tolerate not being like having a nervous system on fire, the more capacity you have to raise the bottom. Because then the next time you go out to dinner with someone and they kind of like, show you some porn on their phone, you're like, this is a no for me. I don't want to go out on another date with this person. And like, maybe I don't feel equipped to be like, please don't show me that on your phone. But you do maybe have it in you to be like, I'm not going to go out on a date with this person again. I don't think I want that. No.
I love that idea of raising the bottom, and it will happen as you get more and more clarity,
Yeah.
right? So you're willing to accept less and less. I feel like I'd like to throw in one little idea before we start wrapping up, which is we have spent most of this podcast talking about codependence from the standpoint of somebody who is the giver. And that's because that's typically the people who are looking for help are the givers because they're thin and worn out, right? But if you have CPTSD or something trauma related, especially in your earlier childhood, you also may be a taker. And that's something that you can change too.
Yes.
If you are aware enough that that's you, you can also shift, and it will be as hard as all the work we were talking about for the other end of that relationship spectrum. So here are a couple of things that I want you to just like run through your brain and think about if it's you. Like if this podcast hasn't been resonating all the way through, is this you? People who are takers in codependent relationships, and I'm using that word because it's part of the culture of codependency, right? No judgment on the takers. If you are a taker, you may feel really insistent or heavily reliant that other people be content in your relationship. That means no problems. And if you've got it, I don't want to hear about it. Okay? So if that's you, like I can't tolerate any distress or disturbance, then pay attention to that.
Yeah.
You also may feel, and this might be counterintuitive, but you also may feel very needy about others' attention toward you and their approval.
Mm-hmm.
You always want to be seen in the best light, right? And it's hard to say, I'm sorry. Or it's hard to say specifically what you did that hurt the other person, even if you know it, right? Another very painful part of this is that you most likely feel really empty and unfulfilled. So if there's just that ache in you that you're not sure where it's coming from, it could be this. Two final ideas. One is you may be comparing yourself to other people all the time. And that is happening because you want that image of perfection to be there, right? And that can lead to chronic irritation and anger. So if any of those sound more like you than what we've been talking about, you also can read about codependency. Now, a lot of the things are going to be geared the other way around. And frankly, I don't really have a book off the top of my head to offer. I don't even know if one exists, but I'm darn sure going to go look and see if there is one. And I'll put it in the link below if we find it. I just wanted to throw that out there because not everybody is in the giving end of codependency.
I'm so glad you brought that up because it also makes me think about the nature of transaction. If you are moving through your world believing that other people owe you their love, owe you their time, owe you their understanding, you are the one who goes to work and makes the money. So like the idea that like somebody owes you their happiness or their satisfaction because you're doing that, or because you have heretofore given them something, so they owe you the return on your investment to your satisfaction. Because yeah, so what Tabitha is talking about is feeling empty. I would add to that not feeling satisfied, feeling unsatisfied.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe I would ask someone to start, if you're like, if you listen to this whole podcast being like, yeah, this other person in my life is this way, and then all of a sudden Tab's like, and you Hallelujah. Go back and listen to the dissociation episode. Because like I think there's a pretty fair amount in being numb and then, not, why isn't it working? Why am I doing all of the right things outside of me and not getting what I want? We didn't really have time to talk, about how the detached avoidant, those are not the folks who come into therapy either. So they're just not really ever the people who are like, I don't have any relationships and it doesn't bother me. They do not come to therapy. And so life feels pretty good for me. There are two things. Yeah, we're getting to the point where we're wrapping up. And one of the things that I want to say, like one of the reasons Tabatha and I laugh on this podcast all the time is because like, this is how it is, man. It's okay. So imago therapy is a type of relationship therapy, not just for partnerships, that's taking it as a point of fact, just the basic assumption that we chose the person that we chose because they give us the opportunities that we need to work out our unfinished business from childhood. So rather than going, oh no, I've done it again, I got to get out of here and go find somebody else. If you've got somebody with you who wants to turn around and face you and is consenting to help you grow, you guys can go and it doesn't have to be an imago therapist. You can watch some videos about this on YouTube. IMAGO. It's Latin for imagine, because it isn't, you need to know what you did to me. It's more like, can you imagine how I'm feeling? And because we have the capacity to imagine what emotions feel like, if we've ever felt lonely or if we've ever felt misunderstood, we can imagine what that's like for someone else. So imago therapy is something that I would recommend if you're in a safe relationship where you've got someone who's like, please work with me. Let's grow together. And the other thing I will reflect to you, and this one's more like an, don't passive aggressively send links to YouTube imago videos to your partner in their email. Like, you go do your own stuff and then see if they want to come along, right? Like, don't do that. And the other thing I'll say is that nonviolent communication is the author is pretty, what's his name? Marshall Rosenberg. He's a PhD holding psychologist. If you like things to be, Western and smart, I'm reading some of his books right now. And one of the things he talks about is being able to say the phrase, what's alive in me? Meaning like, what's alive in me in this relationship right now? Instead of, you did this, so now I'm doing this. Like, it's not focusing on the past. It's about in the present as an effort to get your point across, which is what you need to say about what you need. Without having to make a case to send someone to hell about what they've done to you in the past. Hard work. Hard work.
Yeah.
What about you, Tab? What are your kind of last takeaways?
I want to underscore what you were just saying, Beth, particularly about one thing. First of all, imago therapy is great for understanding the I-thou relationship we talked about last time too, right? So it is a fantastic approach, as is nonviolent communication. And I want to underscore the most important thing you said about that, which is you have somebody who's willing to work with you and is safe, because both of those therapies could be used against you horrifically.
Yeah.
So back to what you were saying, like, do your own thing, like maybe get your own therapist and or coach first so that you've got some ground underneath you so that you know what's going on. Yeah. That combined with focusing on being present, the grounding we talked about today, you're talking about dissociation. If you get a good grip on how those things look for you in your life before you start any kind of joint work, or family work.
Yeah.
Because families do it too, right? That will be safer in general for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because there are, if you're in a relationship where someone keeps telling you that you're the problem, in a relationship with someone else, And this happens at work all the time, right? Well, it doesn't really seem like it was a problem for anyone else to work off the clock to get things done by the end of their week. So I just don't really understand why you're having a problem with that. Yeah. So I'm glad you said that, and I want to remind you guys, as I've said in the past, starting any one of these new skills, standing up for yourself, articulating your boundaries, let it be okay that the voice that's going to come out of your throat is like, I need to tell. Like, it's okay if you're afraid. It's okay if it fails. Like the thing that someone said to me many years ago that has never left me is, we cannot gauge whether or not we have been successful in our communication by how someone else receives us. We're just working on being congruous inside of ourselves. So how do I know I'm a safe person for me? I work very hard to make sure that my words and my actions match each other. When they don't match up, if that was unintentional, I'll say that. If they don't match up and that's what I was doing, then I'll go, yep, that was me. I did it. I'm sorry. I have to work on that. So the other thing that's really juicy about taking your own inventory in this way, tenderly, is that no one can use any of your character defects against you. They'll be like, you're really judgmental. And you're like, I know. Thank you for telling me that. I am 100% working on it. Or someone's like, you are this way. And you're like, yes. Thank you for pointing that out. And we're still on me telling you how what you did made me feel, so that you don't get lost when someone's like, you're this. You can go, yeah, you're right. I'd love to hear more about that as soon as we wrap up what we're in the middle of. Like, you can stay calm like that. You can get your point across, and it's going to change things fundamentally in your life.
Agreed. And I think in closing, and do you have any last minute words before I close this out? Okay. In closing, I would just encourage you to know that simply listening to this podcast today and thinking about it was enough for today. Yeah. Nice job. Good start. All right. So Beth and I are hoping, we're still really, really grateful. We're moving on to some housekeeping, folks. We're still really grateful for the reviews we're getting. Thank you. And emails. Thank you for letting us know that we're impacting you positively. That is super great. We love your ideas. Please keep those coming. We also would encourage you to like or subscribe either this podcast or our YouTube videos. Same thing, different channel, right? Go there and let us know how it's working for you. We're interested.
Yeah.
What are you noticing about codependency?
Yeah. Reviews help us get more visible to more people, so more people can hear this, because some people have been sharing to Tab, and I have been sending your podcast to other people. Well, another way to do that on a grander scale is rate it and leave reviews, because then that gives us more visibility. So then when someone is looking for, do I have this? You can kind of, it's kind of like paying it forward in this way, that if this has ever helped you and it might help someone else wake up, those two actions are really helpful for us.
They sure are. We'd love for you to help us spread our labor of love. So until we meet again, have a safe, fulfilling weekend. Yes, Beth?
Tabatha, how can people find you online if they're looking for you?
Oh, that's a great question. Beth, I'm kind of all over the place. You can find me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and I have a website as well as the website for CPTSD podcast. So if you want to find me on social media, you can either look for my name, Tabatha Bird Weaver, or you can look for Karmic Alchemy, and that will probably get you there. How about you, Beth?
If you're in the state of Louisiana, I'm like thinking about it. I'm like, what even is there? It's possible that I'm going to start coaching more clients like on a grander scale. But as it stands right now, if you're in Louisiana, I'm a therapist for folks who are in Louisiana. We do have the CPTSD podcast, Instagram. I sometimes post memes about healing that I think are charming. And other than that, you can find me on YouTube for this podcast. Thanks for asking. Yeah. So Tab already said, have a great weekend. We want you to know that we do this because we believe that healing is possible. And we want people to have resources and access, but to also feel like this is not dire. Is it hard? Yes. Do you have everything you need to heal? Yes. If you want to do it in this lifetime, you can. You can.
Excellent words of wisdom. We love you, everybody. See you next time.
Bye, guys. See you next time.